Andrew, it's pretty surreal to see you at ETHDenver at an Ethereum Web3 conference. Why are you here?
First, I have to say, when I was running for president, one of the first communities that embraced me was the crypto community. Folks who had a sense of the future, had a vision, and also a spirit of optimism and possibility and abundance. And so when I spoke at Consensus a couple of years ago, when I spoke at a Blockchain for Good conference, I felt that the folks in this community were super aligned with what I was trying to do on the presidential. And it's a thrill to be now here in earnest, trying to contribute and help. Because I firmly believe that the work that so many people here are doing can help contribute to the end of poverty in our time, which has been my mission for the last number of years. And I know a lot of people here want to take that mission forward as quickly as we can.
Andrew, I think a lot of one of the differences between you and the average politician is you think in longer terms than the average politician. A lot of the average politician's trying to get reelected in 2 to 4 years, but you're thinking about things like automation and how do we support every single individual on this planet in an economic way. And I think that's why you find alignment with the crypto community, with the Web3 community. Can you talk about just the importance of thinking in the long term and how that sets you apart as a politician?
Yeah, I think a lot of you know that I'm something of an accidental political figure. Certainly there wasn't a lot of, you're going to be president in the Yang household when I was growing up. Like, that wasn't the conversation. It was more like, you know, keep your head down, get good grades, clean your room, that sort of thing. So I ran in part because I didn't feel like our current political system was thinking long term, was going to actually champion bigger solutions like universal basic income or some of the things that you all are working on, like the next generation financial system. And I think that there are real parallels to Web3 and someone who's trying to make a difference in our political system right now, because there's an entrenched system that is doing its thing and is highly resistant to someone who comes along and says, hey, maybe we should do things differently, maybe we can do something that's more bottom-up than top-down. So the goal is, in my mind, to take the innovation that's improving people's lives and help the folks in DC understand that this is not something that only will benefit a narrow few. If we do it right, it can benefit millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions, even billions over time.
Andrew, there's a decent amount of incumbency in the world, not just in politicians, but in our social structures, the corporations. Things just seem entrenched, and that has caused a lot of social strife. And one of the things that I think the Web3 world is really trying to do is how do we build out new social systems? But how do we actually convince Washington that we need to churn over new institutions? How do we convince the people, the leaders of countries all over the world that it's time for change?
I'm so proud to have announced this week the launch of Lobby 3. It's lobby3.io, and the goal is that we can make a case to the folks in DC who are, frankly, right now in the process of writing these rules, to have a fuller and broader understanding of not just the risks, but also the opportunities and rewards. And the fact is, right now, if you're in DC, you tend to think more in terms of one side than the other. So we can translate the work you all are doing, but it's not going to happen on its own. If you imagine someone sitting in an office building in DC, and their approach to these technologies, it's not just, you know, time zones away from this gathering. It's like a completely different frame of reference, a different mindset. So we have to invest resources in trying to bring the stories and the opportunities to the folks in DC as quickly as we can. In my view, the biggest risk to Web3 is that onerous regulations come out of DC over this next number of years and push a lot of the development energy, frankly, outside of the United States. And that's something I would love to prevent, and I would love your help in helping me prevent that, because I think that innovation and development should take place right here in the US of A.
I want to learn a little bit more about Lobby 3, because I think a lot of the people in the crowd here who might be part of a DAO or might be part of some social community might find a lot of familiarity with what's going on with Lobby 3. What is Lobby 3, and what's a day in the life of being a part of Lobby 3 like?
I'm going to do my best to summarize the way you try and approach politics here in this room today, which is you try and ignore it, honestly, right? Like you're building things, you're making things go faster, and then politics seems irrational and tribal and inefficient, and you're like, oh, please let me not have to deal with that stuff. Is that about right? Yeah, that's very reasonable. I was right there with you before I made the decision to run for President of the United States, circa 2017. So that's the world that you'd like to operate in, but you also sense on some level that there are now forces that are pushing towards much more direct regulation and oversight of Web3 technologies and digital currencies that are going to be written not 3 years from now, but in my opinion, it's going to be measured in weeks and months. The Biden administration is likely going to have an executive order that gets issued in the next 1 to 2 weeks, charging the different agencies with a coordinated regulatory approach to Web3 technologies. So even if you'd love to ignore this stuff, and you want to just like let someone else deal with this, it's going to end up impacting your work at some point in this next little while, probably. So the goal has to be to try and make it so that to the extent these regulations are formulated, they're reasonable, they're transparent, they're done in coordination with industry leaders and people who are just trying to build from the bottom up here in the industry. And that's what we're going to do with Lobby 3. We're going to build a coordinated effort. We're going to have professional lobbyists in DC, yes, but we're also going to be doing grassroots efforts in congressional districts where they just need to see this technology in action. There are so many misconceptions about the people that benefit from these technologies that if we can show people in real life, folks who are benefiting from digital wallets, from next generation of financial services, it can help to shift the perception that right now is in danger of congealing into rules and regulations.
One of the lines that always resonated with me, and I think this is rampant throughout Washington, is that if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. And so we all have a responsibility in this industry to be at the table. And I think that's what Lobby 3 is doing. It's giving everyone else, everyone here in this room, a voice to speak about what are our values and how can we get Washington to align with them, rather than just stamp out what the innovations that we have here are today. For everyone listening, everyone in this room and everyone listening on YouTube, what's like the easiest thing that they can do to help move that needle forward, either with Lobby 3 or just having crypto be represented in Washington?
Well, within Lobby 3, join our Discord. You can go to lobby3.io. We've made it so it's very, very accessible to be able to join Lobby 3 DAO. Like, it's going to be something that if you want to participate, you should be able to do so. And bigger picture, let people know that, look, there's a caricature going on around the communities that benefit from Web3 that isn't accurate. The use cases go well beyond. What do you all think that the DC conception of use cases for digital currencies are? Money laundering, drug deals, human trafficking. That if you were to ask someone in DC, like, what are the top uses, like, those three things would probably pop into their list, top 5. And you all know that there are millions of other purposes and transactions that the technology is used for every single day. So in addition to getting involved with Lobby 3 directly, the single biggest thing you can do is spread the word about the fact that, look, there are creators that are being empowered in totally different ways. There are organizations that are able to govern themselves in whole new ways. There's a technology that can allow us to get away from, frankly, having these megacorps have control over our lives, in part because we're not able to interact with each other with trust and transparency. And so if you introduce that, and you can see why in some ways that there are folks that have a kind of resistant attitude very early on. I mean, a lot of political figures might talk about a particular version of the world or values, but when they're presented with the actual possibility that that world could exist, that they don't embrace it. They actually sort of, like shy away from it. So it's a fascinating challenge, and it's something that I would love your help with undertaking, because I'm going to go on a limb and say the future of Web3 depends upon what we do collectively in the next 12 months.
Is Lobby 3 a DAO?
Yeah, Lobby 3 DAO, it's in the name. So, you know, it itself will be a decentralized autonomous organization. When someone asks me what the priorities of the DAO will be, I respond to ask the DAO.
Who are the other leaders of the Lobby 3 DAO?
So I have a team that I've worked with for quite some time that are part of Lobby 3 itself. You're all not going to believe this. Well, maybe you will. You probably believe it. But so I actually hired a bunch of DC lobbyists back in 2020 to advocate for cash relief and the child tax credit and anti-poverty measures. And I did it in part because it was based on an Onion article I'd read in 2011 that said the American people hire lobbyists to fight for interests on Capitol Hill. Think about that for a second. And I thought it was the funniest thing. I was like, you know, that the fact that we'd have to hire a lobbyist, but I was like, oh, we probably should hire a lobbyist. And so in 2020, I hired a bunch of lobbyists to advocate for anti-poverty measures. And now that team is going to be spearheading our conveying the realities of the opportunities around Web3 to folks in DC. In DC right now, there's the message and the messenger. And I want you to imagine if you were, let's say, a Democratic member of Congress in that office, and then someone comes to you and says, hey, these technologies can really help people. If the messenger that's bringing it to them is a bipartisan think tank or an anti-poverty organization, that's like a different conversation than if they have something like professional, like industry association in their names. You know what I mean? Like that's the reality of what's happening in DC right now. So I'm proud to say I've been working on anti-poverty initiatives in DC for the last 2 years. And in my mind, Web3 could be the biggest anti-poverty initiative in the history of the world.
Andrew, when you ran for president, you moved the Overton window on a lot of things. And you were the figurehead that spoke a lot of reason about new issues in new ways. And it really changed the whole entire Democratic platform, regardless of whether you won or lost. But you are just one man. And you have actually spun off and inspired many other people who are also running for elected official offices in different states. Erica Rhodes comes to mind. And if this movement of what you inspired, whatever this movement is, it needs to have other leaders. It needs to decentralize, because decentralized networks are impossible to stamp out. And all that's needed for a decentralized network to exist is for people to believe in it. And I think the DAO model is allowing people to rise up and allow this movement to be spearheaded by more and more people. Is that the goal?
That's 100% the goal, David. And Erica Rhodes, raise your hand if you know who Erica Rhodes is. All right, so I want you to imagine a member of Congress, let's call him Brad Sherman, who really hates crypto.
Boo.
He's an incumbent that really no one likes, honestly. He's like one of those unliked members of Congress who's just been hanging out for a while. He is unabashedly anti-cryptocurrency, anti-Web3. He has a lot of backers in the, frankly, like the banking system. Now, his opponent is Erica Rhodes, who's completely pro-Web3, and she also has a compelling personal story. She's an elementary school teacher. She's half black, half Asian. She was a volunteer in my campaign who's now running for Congress, has raised hundreds of thousands of dollars, had a Twitter Spaces with Jack Dorsey the other day. So if you want someone like Brad Sherman to know that being against this industry is a political loser, then you should back his opponent, Erica Rhodes. You can look it up. It's Erica for Congress. It's spelled A-A-R-I-K-A. So there are different candidates like this around the country that, in my mind, the community should be getting behind. Now, this is not Lobby 3's work. Lobby 3's work is going to be go to DC and talk sense to the regulators. But there are other people who are putting political energy behind folks who are fighting for this industry, and I think that we owe them our support, honestly.
For those of you that happen to live in California 30th District, that's your race. So, I'm sure there's some of you in there. Andrew, a lot of DAOs in the Web3 world have roadmaps. Does the Lobby 3 DAO have a roadmap?
Yeah, if you go to lobby3.io, there is a roadmap. One of the things I would suggest, though, is that the priorities of the DAO will probably shift in real time as the agencies actually put forward draft rules and a bunch of other things. So you're going to want to be adaptable and responsive in real time. For those of you who want nothing to do with DC, maybe some of you actually could find some enjoyment in learning about this process. Maybe, I don't know if that's too far a bridge. One of the things I describe it to people as you can actually gamify lobbying, maybe. You could say like, hey, like that, you know, here's a member of Congress, here's an agency, here's a this. So the roadmap of the DAO, I'm sure, will end up shifting as different priorities emerge, because this is very much a right now concern. The Biden administration has announced that an executive order is going to come out probably again in the next 1 to 2 weeks.
Do you know more details about that executive order? What do you know about that? That seems actually a really big deal.
So what I've heard is that the executive order will say to the agencies, let's come up with a coordinated regulatory response, but it will not put forward the response itself just yet. So what it is to me is the starting gun. It's like, okay, these agencies are then going to draft these rules, and we need to have a direct line with them so that they don't write rules that are, frankly, very, very onerous, very heavy-handed, prioritize managing the risk well over innovation and development and growth. So I'm happy to say that we're relatively optimistic about the executive order announcement itself, but it should be a massive call to action for the Web3 community.
This is an all-hands-on-deck moment.
It really is. I want you to imagine a world where 8 months from now, a bunch of rules come out of DC that end up pushing a lot of energy overseas, reducing the enterprise value of folks who've been working on projects for years and years. This is all very much a realistic possibility. I also want you to imagine a world where rules come out that you might not love, but actually allow you to operate and build for the long term. And I dare say that if you were to have this latter scenario, you might see the energy in the industry shoot up. Because right now, there is an overhang of this regulatory risk. Like, no one knows exactly what the approaches are going to be, what the regime's going to be, what the rules are going to be, even who the regulator's necessarily going to be. So if you get clarity on those things, then you can imagine, as glorious as this gathering is here today in Denver, you can imagine the future of this just multiplying over and over again, because everyone will know what the rules of the road are. That's a vision I'm willing to fight for, and I hope you'll join me in it.
So can you model out what we need to do as an industry to turn this opportunity into a W? And what would also happen if this would actually turn into an L? Like, how could we drop the ball here? What would we fail at? And also, what do we need to do to make sure it's a dub?
Well, I think the single biggest thing we have to do is know that as much as you might dislike politics, a lot of you might even think like, hey, I hate the idea of any regulation. In my mind, some form of regulation is going to have to be accepted and somewhat inevitable for the industry to mature. But the path of least resistance, and there are people in the industry that are in direct touch with the folks in DC, like the Blockchain Association and others. So there are folks who are advocating, but the single biggest misstep would be, someone else will take care of it. Like, I'm doing my thing. Like, you know, like let me just focus on this for the time being. Because someone in this community has to make the proper investments and resources and energy and time and commitment to try and keep these regulations on the right side of reasonable. And I'm not sure if you can tell from my tone of voice, like, I am kind of concerned. I'm actually going to pose this thought question to you all. How much do you trust Washington, D.C. to just get things right? So if that's a relatively low level of confidence, then I want you to think about what would need to happen for you to have a higher confidence level. And generally speaking, the gap between where you are now and that higher confidence level involves resources, investment, ingenuity, time, energy, passion, narratives, storytelling, broadening people's conception of what is possible. It's one reason why I love Web3 so much, is like this is a group of people that's legitimately building a better version of the future. And unfortunately, there are so many Americans who right now are struggling with like this boot of scarcity on their throat. And then when you say to them, it's like, hey, these great things are possible, they're unable to envision them. You know what I mean? That has to be the biggest thing that we change together, is if we help them see what's possible and maybe even get that boot off their throats, then we can live in a version of the future that we'll be proud of.
Andrew, you talked about time, energy, attention, resources. These are all things that DAOs need. So when you are growing the Lobby 3 DAO, you and the other DAO leaders in there, the organizers, what talent or what resources does Lobby 3 DAO need the most? Does it need capital? Does it need foot soldiers? Does it need developers? What could it use the most?
Everything you just listed there, David, for sure. I'm not going to, to pretend like we are going to need probably some significant institutional resources who will come in, and I'm happy to say that many of them seem very excited about this effort. But then we're also going to need people who are helping us identify the stories to amplify, who are reaching out directly to folks in a particular community saying, look, like, members of Congress will respond to their constituents. So there are folks that that are in particular parts of the country that could end up being very, very crucial. It's going to be an all-hands-on-deck effort. And this is the single thing I would say is, like, if you think this is a problem that just some like industry heavyweight with a lot of money can solve, like, that's probably not quite what we're facing right now. You know what I mean? Like, you have to think about, again, that Democratic member of Congress in Ohio or Michigan or another part of the country. Like, what do they care about? What is going to make them go from being very skeptical or dubious about cryptocurrencies and Web3 to being neutral and maybe even positive? And sometimes it's the kind of thing where if you just like threw your weight around DC, like maybe that moves some people. But what would be most effective, and this is actually in some ways a cause for optimism, it would be people in their community benefiting from Web3. And then if they're actually shown that, if like a local community leader or an activist or a nonprofit says, hey, look what it's doing for this neighborhood that you represent, that's the single most powerful way we can help turn this negativity around among Congress members.
I think the Web3 community, traditionally crypto has been very like anti-government, we can do it ourselves, no government. But the Web3 community, I think, is a little bit more reasonable, at least in my opinion, that we want to be able to be better than the government, but we'll accept government regulations at the end of the day. And we've seen different leaders show up and actually lean into politics. Ryan Selkis, I saw him over there not too long ago, taking a leadership position. What advice do you have for people that might actually want to lean in and be representatives of Web3 in Washington or in their local communities or in other regulatory bodies?
Well, there are a number of organizations that are now advocating for sensible regulations. Blockchain Association, I just mentioned, is one. Lobby 3 will be a new member of this system. But certainly, if there is someone who wants to lead on this charge, just get in touch with me or Kristen Smith or one of the other people that's actually talking to the folks in DC, because we need you. We need you to lean in and help lead. And I will suggest that this is something that's going to help everyone here. It's going to help everyone who could potentially benefit from these technologies. I pride myself on just trying to be, frankly, like intelligent about like how you invest time and energy. Like right now, this is maybe arguably the most important area of investment for Web3, in my opinion, because you're looking at a legislative window and a regulatory window that's like very much open right now. And if you rewind a couple of years ago, this was not on anyone's radar. You know what I mean? Like if you were to say, hey, we need to like add shape this, it's like, yeah, it's not really there. It's there now. Like this is very much like on the front burner for a number of people in DC. So we have to get after it right now.
All right, Andrew, I got one last question for you, and then we're going to open up to questions. So if you have a good question, you can line up at the microphone, and we're going to get there in a second, right after I ask my last one. Andrew, one of the things I think we align most with between you and the Web3 community is we're all optimistic about the future because we think we can build it better. Why are you optimistic about the future? What makes you optimistic?
Why am I optimistic about the future? I'm optimistic about the future because of entrepreneurs who are solving problems in front of them every day. That's what's made me tick. That's what led me to run for president. Believe it or not, I just saw a giant problem. I thought I could help solve it. And we need that approach and orientation and energy more than ever. Because like I said before, there's so many Americans who are struggling right now. Not just Americans, but around the world. I don't know if you've noticed, but like the world is kind of going to shit. I mean, I don't know if you all like sense that. You know what I mean? So when you ask my causes for optimism, it's that things can change really quickly, both positively and negatively. So we have to take advantage of the positive as well as the negative. We can't just say like, oh, things are going to get worse. I'm going to do my own thing over here. That's actually my challenge to the folks here together in Denver today. And if you're watching on YouTube, fine, whatever. Is that let's make it so that people can see the benefits of these technologies in the real fucking world as quickly as possible.
All right, we just got about 2 minutes left, so we're going to take a few quick questions, ideally simple ones. Can you take it away for us?
Right. Hi, I'm Dr. Kelly Page from Digital Promise, the National Center for Research in Emerging Tech in Education and Learning. I'm curious your thoughts on the decentralization of learner and employee data that we have in our institutions, both across the country, as well as our organizations, and the emerging trend towards LERs, learning and employment records, being decentralized. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Thank you for the work you're doing. I'm a huge believer in anything that helps create alternate paths to employment that don't involve four-year degrees or traditional credentialing. Right now, like so much of it operates in an antiquated system. It's not serving people well. People are doing what they think they're supposed to do, incurring massive debt loads. They're not finding the opportunities that they need. So if there is a way that you can actually translate your value and data to potential employers that's independent of our current educational system and even to some extent like the professional advancement system that exists, I would be 100% supportive, and we need to do more in that area.
All right, thank you.
Andrew, my question is about the Forward Party and if you plan on leveraging Web3 within your campaigning or once you have members get into office, what the stance for legislation might be.
Thank you. So the question's about the Forward Party. I don't know how many of you know, but I started a third party in the United States of America. And I did that in part because the duopoly is not working. It's actually turning people against each other more than anything else. And the Forward Party wants to be the party of technological advancement and progress. So we're going to use Web3 technologies at every stage, hopefully. My goal is that there's a DAO, and again, the joys of it is that we may have nothing to do with the DAO, that looks up and tries to find the best opportunities for independent political candidates, for people who are running as Democrats or Republicans who are aligned, and we put our energy and ingenuity behind this because you have a failing political system. You have failing systems of different kinds in America, but the failing political system is one that is right in front of everyone. 62% of Americans want to move on from the duopoly. They just don't know how to do it. And I'm going to suggest that the people here in this room can show them how we can move on. Say, look, it doesn't need to be that you have no choice but to slump and accept the lesser of two evils. You can actually invest in a positive alternative.
Thank you.
I believe we just have time for one last question, so take it away.
Cool. Hi, Mr. Yang. I'm wondering if you can lay out kind of what are the gaps in Washington that the community can help with. So is it knowledge? Is it, analysis? Like, what do they sort of not understand about tokens or innovation that might happen that we can all kind of help with? Yeah. What are the gaps?
Oh, man, thank you for the question. The reason I'm laughing is because the gaps are not gaps. The gaps are essentially a gulf or a chasm. So the average member of the House of Representatives is approximately 59 years old. The average US Senator is approximately 64 years old. The average member of Congress who's been in Congress has been in Congress for 10 to 12 years. So I want you to imagine that human, and then if you ask them, hey, cryptocurrencies, tokens, like digital assets, what do you think? Like, they have no idea what you're talking about. And so right now, they're looking around saying, what do I think about this? They ask their policy team, what is our stance on this? The policy team then looks up and says, what is our stance on this? And then they will ask a few people, hey, like, what's a reasonable place to land on this? The people they may ask include people in their constituencies. It may include bipartisan policy councils who are known for having like an even-handed approach. One group that they may or may not want to take guidance from would be like the industry itself. Because the industry itself, they'll be like, okay, like I kind of know what you're going to tell me. You're going to tell me that, you know, like we should do next to nothing. And so that's the state of affairs right now. But if you were to try and put yourself into the head of the average member of Congress, just imagine total confusion, and you are there. Like that's where it is among the vast, vast majority of them. Now that confusion can then be tilted negatively very easily by, for example, a press story about scams. You know, if that's the only thing they see, then they can head in that direction pretty quick. So we have to balance some of the things that are out there in the media ecosystem with some accounts of, again, creators having their lives transformed for the better, people having new access to digital service, like financial services they wouldn't have had otherwise. I'm going to pose this to you all. How many of you think that the negative stories about Web3 outnumber the positive stories, let's call it 5 or 10 to 1? Right? So that is the landscape that these lawmakers are forming their opinions in. And it's up to us to try and lead them to a more realistic picture. Don't blame them. Just imagine that there's 50 to 60-year-olds who might only know about this stuff because one of their children or like a nephew or niece has been trying to explain it to them unsuccessfully.
Andrew Yang, everyone.
Thank you, Denver. Let's go. Let's build a future. It's not going to build itself, am I right? Thank you all.